Okay.
Yeah, and everybody can hear me fine.
Yeah.
Great.
Yep.
Good.
And we're
Good
live.
morning. We're live. Welcome to the fourth Meet the Masters series with Thierry Boulinier and Dr. Bill Sydeman. My name is Amanda Gladix. I'm a faculty research assistant at Oregon State University. I work on a variety of seabird topics, including foraging ecology and seabird bycatch issues. We have a great set of early career scientists with us this morning, and I will let them introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Lang. I'm with the University of Washington. I'm a master's student working with beached bird data collected by the Citizen Science Program COAST, or the Coastal Observation and Seabird Survey Team, under the direction of Dr. Julia Parrish. So my thesis focuses on creating baselines of carcass encounter rate with which to identify abnormally high encounter rate events, or RECs. And I'm further trying to characterize REC events by evaluating whether they differ from non-REC events based on certain carcass characteristics or species composition.
Hi, my name is Jenniferpravasi, and I'm a PhD student, and I work in northern Canada, mostly with hunters who harvest seabirds. And my thesis is looking at the interaction between parasites and contaminants in action. And so I work mostly in Nunavut and northern Quebec with hunters out on the and at some of our breeding colonies. And I'm interested in mostly mercury, as we see it increasing in some areas in the Arctic, but a bunch of other questions including prey changes and reproduction and predation, as well as plastics that they also ingest along the way.
My name's Nicholas Perry-Hufeld, and I'm a PhD student at Wake Forest University. I work with behavioral ecology of Arctic auks for the most part, and this should be a fun discussion.
Hi, I'm Janina Pisonia. I am a student at Montpellier University. I'm doing a doctorate about the dynamic of population of seabirds, of Peruvian seabirds that produce guano.
Sorry about the delay. I'm Pam Michael. I'm a PhD student at the University of Tasmania in a joint program with CSIRO, or the Commonwealth Institute for Commonwealth Science Institute for Research Organization. Sorry about my mild dyslexia. I'm in the Quantitative Marine Science program. My thesis involves looking at, or attempting to model, the impacts of climate change on the distribution of fishing effort in the southern Indian Ocean, particularly the distribution of pelagic longline fleets, and then their overlap and subsequent impacts on albatross populations through bycatch.
Hi, I'm Caroline Poli. I just finished my master's degree at Clemson University. I was studying foraging ecology of seabirds, and I'd like to get better at using that information to influence conservation.
And I'm Shurer Hammer, calling from University of Glasgow, where I'm doing my PhD on breeding ecology of a few seabirds, mainly great skuas. And it's my privilege as co-host as well to introduce one of our masters, Dr. William Sydeman, His career spans more than 3 decades of ecological research, starting as an intern marine ornithologist working on the Farallon Islands in 1981. Bill spent 50 years as the director of marine ecology at PRBO Conservation Science before establishing the Farallon Institute. Bill obtained his PhD in ecology from the University of California, Davis. Bill has conducted a number of plankton to predator studies in the California current large marine ecosystem and has written about seabirds, marine mammals, and various fish species. He serves on many scientific panels, notably as the chair of the advisory panel for marine birds and mammals for the North Pacific Marine Science Organization and scientific advisory committee for implementation of the State of California's Marine Life Protection Act. Bill is also active in advising state and federal marine policy makers on the effects of climate change on marine ecosystems and how to best design and use the United States new ocean observing systems.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here, Bill. I would also like to introduce our second master, Dr. Thierry Boulinier. Dr. Boulinier brings a background in veterinary medicine, ecology, and evolution to his research on ecological epidemiology and population function across spatial scales. He holds a PhD in ecology from Université Pierre and Marie Curie, as well as a doctorate of veterinary medicine from Alfred Veterinary School and University Créteil. I probably am pronouncing that incorrectly. Using observational and theoretical and experimental approaches, Dr. Boulinier examines the role of individual dispersal behavior on population dynamics and in host-parasite interactions. His work underscores the importance of considering the spatial dimension in understanding biodiversity dynamics, epidemiology, and the ecological effects of human-caused environmental changes. Dr. Boulinier is a permanent researcher at the Center for Functional Ecology and Evolution, which is a large research unit of the French National Scientific Research Center and the University of Montpellier, France. He maintains an active research program with field sites from the Norwegian Arctic to the sub-Antarctic alongside collaborators from across Europe and beyond. We are very grateful for your taking the time to be with us today.
Well, thank you for hosting us.
All right, so I think what we'd like to do now is just jump right into the questions that our early career scientists have put together. They range a wide variety of topics, so I want to be sure to give ample time to everyone's questions. So we're going to go first to Jennifer Lang for the first question.
Good morning, and thank you so much, Bill and Terry, for being here. And we love to just get insight from people with so much experience. So I'd like to jump into talking about the fact of the need for collaboration. So to get to the big picture of ecosystem synthesis, there are many pieces that have to be collected and put together. So with many different long-term monitoring programs spanning different temporal and spatial extents, was this a challenge for you that has to be overcome, or is this a big challenge for, in general, researchers across the world? And for your own projects, have you found it difficult to gather appropriate data and collaborate with others? And we could start with Bill first.
Well, I get the tough question to start with. Can you hear me, Amanda?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, this is a very good question. Like, how does one develop the collaborations and the team that you need to answer the questions that that you're posing, especially in climate change ecology, or what we call climate change ecology, because it's a multidisciplinary study. And so I would say it is a challenge. I just think about through my sort of history of working with people, you have to find the right people to work with, and that takes a lot of time. But I think that that my take on at least working with oceanographers and atmospheric scientists and other ecologists that are working in different realms of ecology is that everybody wants this, but it's a challenge because people come at it, they speak a different language basically, and so again, you have to find the right people that want to put the effort into learning each other's language so that you can effectively collaborate. I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, so I can pick up there, but yeah, I guess you made the important point is to find the right people who are willing to invest some time and thought and energy. And I guess it depends on the question like you want to ask, like what type of collaborators you may have to develop the collaboration and at what spatial scale, and so for some specific project, like as you mentioned, long-term studies, you may find a good site where things can be done very well with some other teams of collaborators, and then things can go smoothly from there, or you may have to work more at broad spatial scale, and then to have to contact several potential collaborators, and then it's a little bit different. So I don't know if it starts to answer your question.
Oh, no, that was great. So did you find that it was difficult to put together different spatial and temporal scale projects together to complete your goals?
Bill?
Yeah, I guess I'll go first. It is difficult, and it's always difficult because the scales of data that are taken in different disciplines are quite different. And you know, the physical side of things, there tends to be a lot more high resolution data to the second even, or at a very fine spatial scale. And of course, with biological data, we're always limited to data that's not available at very fine scales. So you can aggregate up the physical data to match the scale of the biological data, but oftentimes the questions that you want to answer or ask and answer, I think particularly the type of work that Thierry's been doing, you really want that finer scale biological data, and it's extremely difficult to come by. So again, it's a challenge, but it is something that that I think is improving with the advent of tracking technology and a variety of other new things that are going on in terms of getting higher resolution biological data.
So I may add that it's a challenge, but it's part of the fun of the work also.
Yeah, it is fun. It is fun.
And find the right people. So yeah, as you said, it depends on the scale, and it is. And I may just give an example. Well, you have to have energy and to really focus on some questions and then set up things. I think like in Europe a few years ago, Morten Frederiksen was able to set up a broad-scale study on using GLS to track the wintering areas of kittiwakes. So there are 18 teams, 18 places where they were deployed, and that really brought a lot of information back, and that clearly was due to his effort to connect all these researchers that already had been developing long-term work in different places. So, but yeah, it's part of the job, and it's an interesting part of the job.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks for that. Before going on to our next question, I forgot to announce that it's actually possible for live viewers to shoot questions at our masters, and that can be done through Twitter using the hashtag MTMSC, or on our YouTube channel on the comments. And I think Jenniferpravasi has a question ready now.
Thanks, and again, I also want to extend my thanks to both Bill and Thierry for taking part in this. My question is kind of reflecting of your experiences. I've heard both George Devoki and Tony Gafton, who work in Seabirds, talk about how they never set out to study changing climate, But now, 30 years later, they have these data sets that have been really important in understanding how climate change is actually affecting seabirds. And if possible, I'd like you to reflect on your own experiences or choices or opportunities that you've kind of come across that have led you down a path that you didn't expect to go down, or to really cool projects you didn't set out to take part in, but have led to some really cool things.
Yeah, that's. I guess I would say that that's true for me as well. That I didn't start out thinking about ecosystems, and I didn't start out thinking about climate or climate change or climate variability. That these were things that came along with developing expertise, if you will, in seabird ecology and seabird population biology in particular for me. So I think that we started out, at least I started out, and it became very apparent that El Nino was driving a lot of what we were seeing, and so then that kind of naturally led to other focuses on climate-related changes and sort of the ecosystem. In other words, we knew that El Nino was having an effect, but we didn't really know why until we started to look at changes in prey fields, and then it was apparent that these changes in food were driving these changes that we were seeing in breeding success and the survival of the birds. So I guess through that interest, if you will, there was what I call sort of studying down the food web. You start with birds and then move down and look at forage fishes, and now a lot of my work is actually on plankton. I've been doing a lot of work on krill and other zooplankton, of course, that support forage fish. And I guess I had one paper last year that was just strictly physical oceanography. So I think I've gone all the way down through the food chain at this point. So, but it's a fun way of doing it. But you don't think that you're going to do it when you begin. It's something that develops as, I guess, the depth of your questions develops.
Yeah, so I'll pick up on that. Yeah, I think when we look at the end, or not the end, sorry, but right now, backward, you can see that maybe not everything that developed, that unfold, was predicted clearly in our research program. But basically, at the beginning, if you have specific questions, you can start to dig in those, and keeping in mind, like keeping eyes open to things that show up and that can give you ideas for developing new things along the way. On this specific point, I can just refer to, if I have time, just a small example. I have been working on disease circulation and interaction between ticks and seabirds in northern Norway, interacting with kittiwakes mostly and other seabirds. And then this led me eventually to deal with immunological issues. And I remember a few years ago, Henri Weinerskirch, working on albatrosses, who asked me, can you help with, we have an avian cholera problem, could you have any suggestion? And at that time I said, well, I don't have a specific suggestion, like about the classical approach, a bit veterinary wildlife approach. But then a few years after, from my work on kittiwakes, we found, then on other, actually on Procellariiform in the north, in immunological aspects, we found things that suddenly I realized, hey, this can be important for what's going on with the albatrosses and the avian cholera. So then I recontacted Henri, and now we are setting up a good line on this aspect. So it's just to say that it's not, well, we unfold our research program, keeping eyes open, and along the way, depending on the answers we get from our questions, we can then go and ask other questions, and sometimes in other systems. So I don't know but I think it's it's clear that in some ways we cannot predict what we will be doing in 5 years, but it doesn't mean that we don't have clear aim, and that this is the way we can go forward in a productive way. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you. That does for both of you.
Great. Let's go next to Nicholas.
All right. So I'm jumping into an interesting topic that has to do with ecosystems and a little bit to do with climate change too, following up on the last question. So an article was recently published by some colleagues in around California describing how seabirds in that region shift their breeding from traditional breeding locations to more northern locations because of different environmental and anthropogenic influences. My question to you two, the two of our masters, how do the various types of information compete to influence the decision of individuals to shift their spatial distribution from non-traditional breeding locations, or from traditional breeding locations to non-traditional breeding locations? And a second part to that question is, what kind of social barriers or attractions may encourage or inhibit breeding dispersal?
Wow, tough question. Yeah, so you're referring to the study by Enriqueta Velarde on dispersal of, I guess it was elegant terns from the Gulf of Mexico to Southern California, movement to the north. Yeah, I guess I'm not sure. I'm very loosely familiar with that study. I haven't read it in detail. Came out, I think, pretty recently. But I believe that when individuals are faced with, for example, low breeding success over a series of years, or low survival, or let's say a high divorce rate or high rate of change of mates for various reasons due to mortality or other factors, that's the kind of cue that individuals may take to search new locations. But I think, in a sense, the larger side of this is that it does have to do with their foraging efficiency or foraging ecology. And I think, if I understand the story in the Gulf of Mexico, there have been a series of years of very poor food availability, mainly having to do with sardines and maybe to some extent anchovy. No, I think it's all sardines, actually. The birds have failed in their reproduction for a number of years in that location in the Gulf of Mexico. And at the same time, there was an increase in food in the estuaries of Southern California. And so, being highly mobile organisms, the terns were able to locate those new food resources and move along and move to the north. I'm not sure that's really a climate change signal, because there are other indications that food availability in Southern California is actually decreasing, particularly anchovy. There's been a crash of the anchovy population there recently, since about 2008. But it does show that these seabirds are extremely adept at locating other resources that they need and then taking advantage of them through their ability to move. There's also a big sardine fishery in the Gulf of Mexico, and I guess that's also affecting. So it's a combination of environmental effects and fisheries effects that is affecting the sardine availability to the terns. I think I'll stop there. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, so I'll carry on from there. I think it's a really, really good question, because it really shows the complexity of the processes we're dealing with and the need to integrate approaches like food availability approach, oceanographic approach, and population biology and behavior. But it also clearly shows that all this should not be just put together with no clear question about the underlying processes, and that for each sub-discipline, like, we need to really address precise questions to try to really. So, for instance, on these whole aspects, I'm not very familiar with the interaction with the fisheries and the food, but about the behavior of individuals and how they respond and may disperse following heavy breeding, repeated breeding failures. From the work we've been doing with kittiwakes, well, this helps. I think the work we had been doing in the past with kittiwakes can help to interpret this kind of responses, but at the same time, terns are actually moving more than kittiwakes, and so we got to be careful when we try to use some results from one species to another. If it had been, for instance, murres or guillemot, like common murres, we could have expected a very, well, much less, well, we can expect much less mobile population. So yeah, I think it's a nice example of the need to integrate approaches and the fact that we don't understand everything, and that in this case, for instance, if I read the paper relatively fast, but I think we don't have data on individual that actually have moved. So they infer the fact that it's the same population that has moved from changes in numbers that cannot be explained just by the local demography. And so this is an important aspect that could be looked at in more detail. And also, of course, as there are different environmental factors, there is the causality relationship that are always difficult to infer. So I think it's a very nice example of what can be done with seabirds, and also what it opens interesting venues to carry on. And it clearly shows that yeah, working with the effect of climate change or large-scale changes on populations requires to look at what the birds are doing on the colony and what the birds are doing at sea. And so ideally integrating all this.
Can I jump back in for a sec? I had another thing to add to this. Nicholas asked, what are the barriers to these kinds of changes as well? And there's some very nice work in South Africa recently. There's been a shift in the distribution of sardine from the Western Cape into the Algulis Current, and the gannets that we're breeding along the Western Cape have been able to shift as well and follow the gannets around the Horn of Africa, or the tip of Africa, I mean, whereas the African penguins have not. And so obviously there are big differences in the ability of those two species to move. And there's another idea that there is behavioral inertia, and I don't know very much about this idea, but there's behavioral inertia for the penguins to remain put, whereas the gannets have been able to move and follow the sardines. So, you know, I think that there's intrinsic differences between species. Again, I'm not an expert on this area at all, but that either allow or facilitate movements or restrict movements. So those are the kinds of things that one could look at to try to understand that phenomenon a little bit better.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, this is really a good point. I think also we have to realize that through behavior and interaction with the population responses, there can be very nonlinear responses. And for instance, if, like, one social barrier is to the first colonization of an empty area is a big can lead to really a big change, and there we have a clear social barrier before the first bird will start to settle, and then potentially attract other birds, and then lead to the development of a colony there. And so, for some of these processes, there are relatively few teams working on these aspects compared to some other aspects of seabird biology, and I think well, I would say we're one of the few teams working on this. I think it would be good if other teams were actually, yeah, trying, like for instance in the case of the gannets, trying to understand how it happens that they can track changes in the environment faster than in other species. And notably, there's like whole sets of knowledge about the movement of prospecting birds that may sample the habitat and maybe gathering information and starting to settle in other places. And these kind of movements are not much studied or tracked, even if now we start to have technology and we deploy a lot of devices to track what the birds are doing in terms of foraging. But what do they do in terms of exploring their own environment for potentially changing colony? That's a relatively open question. That's
Thank you both for your answers. I think it's an interesting topic that we're going to see some advances in the relatively near future, hopefully.
It's great to hear the discussion between you two too. Thank you. Let's go on to Janina. She's got the next question.
Yes. My question is about is an ecological question too. I know that Farallon Island is one of the places in the world that have a large data set of oceanography, seabirds, trophic data, and for that reason, I like to ask, in your experience, which are the life story traits of seabirds that we can consider as sensitive to the climate change, and how can we difference from another variability of seabirds? Because I know in the upwelling system there are a lot of variability, and we can how can we consider as a climate change effect and different from another variability? A second part of the question is how can we report and mitigate the effects on seabirds, well, doing another component of the ecosystem also.
Shall we go to Bill first?
Yeah.
I think for the Farallon, Bill will do better. Oh, have we lost Bill? No.
Yeah, we've lost Bill maybe for a few seconds. Yeah.
Oh, so should I
take a stab at it?
Well, so the Farallon Islands is in California. Yeah, I've not been close to this part of the world, but I guess I can answer more generally. I guess one part of the question, which is then not specific to the Farallon Island, is the problem of having many variables from the environment and how to tease apart which one may be playing a role. So I guess for this, why it's important to guess some of the processes that may be responsible for the response of the population. So what kind of food the species that you consider will be eating, and at what scale this kind of food sources will vary, and so on. And this, I guess, can be inferred from the literature, and then from this you can make a prediction and then try to test and infer whether from the long-term series these are the factors that are important. I guess maybe the question is also, is it also linked with the gathering of data, and what kind of data should be gathered along the way for a long-term program to answer this kind of question?
Yeah, yeah. How come study climate change, because there are a lot of variability in the system, and could be another an interannual variability or decadal variability, but how can we use data to report climate change?
Well, I think then I would ask, like, what do we consider as climate change? Like, what kind of effect of climate change are we interested in? The small scale effect, large scale effect? Because I'm not like, climate change effect is not my main topic, but I would say that clearly climate change will have effect at different scales, and it's hard to answer to a really broad question like what climate change effect is on all seabirds, for instance. So you would I think the study mentioned by Nicholas earlier, we can really have a more precise question saying, is climate change in some circumstances responsible for broad spatial scale changes in distribution of seabird species? And in that case, this kind of study, and you can imagine, well, you have this kind of study, or you can imagine new studies with data gathering in the field to answer this kind of question. But if we stay with a really broad question about climate change, it's a bit hard for me to pinpoint how to handle that.
Question. Okay. But thanks.
So we have completely lost Bill. He will hopefully come back up.
Yeah, he'll hopefully rejoin us. Maybe we can circle back around to get his perspective on that question later on.
Yeah.
Let's go on to Pam. We will hopefully be able to draw some of this in from Bill also, but let's just go ahead and roll on. Pam's got a great question I think you will be able to have some good insights on as well.
Let's see.
Thanks for that. I'm stepping back into the kind of career-minded, and also I'll just kind of jump into the questions, self-explanatory. Being an interdisciplinary researcher, how do you define your research specialty in terms of creating a unique skill set and really kind of, frankly, selling yourself as a valuable researcher? And some follow-ups to that are, if you've ever encountered people challenging the interpretation of your science because they have categorized you as being a specialist in one area as opposed to being able to speak knowledgeably on another, and how would you suggest other either aspiring or currently interdisciplinary scientists address that kind of feedback if they do receive it?
Well, I guess part of the scientific process is to be challenged by others about the answer we're trying to get to, the question we are trying to ask. Well, first, are your question really that interesting? And yeah, well, it's on birds, it's not maybe so interesting, but for some people. So then it depends how ready or how you are with answering to that question. What are your question interesting? Yes, to me, again, they are interesting to understand underlying population processes, for instance, to environmental variability. And with this, I think using seabirds as models, we can answer questions that can be applied to other systems. And that's one way to let people know that we are not only doing things that have only implication for seabirds. So I don't know if that's partially answering your question. And the interdisciplinary aspect, I guess it's important to, I think it comes back to maybe one of the first questions about setting a collaboration with good people that are willing to actually do work at the interface between disciplines. And that's part of the fun, to be able to also yourself try to develop interdisciplinary skills. And yeah, I don't know if I felt in your question that have we suffered from being working on seabirds, or I don't know. Maybe one way to answer, which is also important, is that the fact that I have not only worked on seabirds, as actually maybe seabird researchers have in their career sometimes work on other topics. And in my case, it's true that it's important to be able to say, well, yeah, I've been working on seabirds. I like to work with seabirds for different reasons. They are very good models to answer some questions. They live in fun place and they are nice birds in themselves. But I'm able to do that with other things. And so I work at more quantitative approaches with the dynamic of communities. But not clearly not seabirds, more birds or fish communities for a few years as postdocs for 3 years. And so, and in this field, I had fun, and I also learned a lot of things that were very interesting for me to apply to seabird question. And so, I guess that's maybe a way to feel quite comfortable about working with seabirds as model for my research. So, I don't know if you see that. in your career, you may have done different, work with different things, not only seabirds, and that may help you to feel not threatened or having a problem to be currently working with seabirds, or to imagine working with seabirds your whole life after.
Thank you. Should I continue your question with Bill, or do you want to go back one?
Yeah, let's round out that question. We've got Bill back, it sounds like. We see his video.
I am here.
Great.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. I just disappeared.
That's okay. We're glad you're back. So Pam, do you want to redirect that question and maybe reiterate some of it for Bill?
Sure. I'm asking how, as an interdisciplinary researcher, you comfortably define your current research identity in terms of being able to provide authoritative knowledge on your topic, even though, as you mentioned, you've had maybe your research identity has been a bit dynamic, from birds to different aspects of the ecosystem, and then also how to deal with or how you'd suggest approaching people challenging your ability to describe or interpret one aspect of a system, say the impacts of climate change, when your background is in, or when they're more familiar with your research in a different topic.
Yeah, very good question. Dynamic is one way of phrasing it. It's funny, the way I think about it sometimes is jack of all trades, master of none. But of course, that's not really the way it is. And I think it's tricky, especially as one becomes more generalized. I mean, in graduate school, you become very specialized in a particular area. And then some people stay focused in those stay focused in that specificity during their career, and then other people become more general, I guess. And I certainly have become more general as time has gone on. So in terms of a research identity, when people ask me what I do, I'll say I'm a scientist. That's the first step. The second step is, what do you work on? And at this point, I just say ecosystems. Most people, even members of the public, when you say ecosystems, people understand that it's a complex system. They may not know that it's a complex adaptive system, but it's a complex system. And so I think that one can say that you work on ecosystems, and then, well, what do you work on specifically? And then it's birds and other things, birds and fish and plankton. So, but it is hard. I think you do get questioned. Certainly, I've had, I'll relay one funny story, a proposal that we submitted, and one of the reviews that came back, I was supervising the physical oceanographer on the proposal, who was a young scientist, a postdoc, that was working in our lab, and one of the reviewers said, basically, Sydeman will supervise the physical oceanographer. How's that going to work? And so you do get questioned, and I think that largely you have to let that kind of roll off you. And one of the things in science, as everybody knows, you do have to be thick-skinned, and sometimes comments are made that are appropriate and not really personal. Now, I would say that was not an appropriate comment, but it was funny in a sense, and you had to appreciate it for what it was. The person, it was an interdisciplinary project. The person was probably a physical oceanographer that was making the review comments, and maybe in all honesty, he didn't understand how that was going to work, or she. I don't know who it was. I just think it's it's one of those things that we all have to deal with, especially when you work in different areas. That yes, people are going to question your expertise, but they might question your expertise even in your area of greatest expertise. So that just happens, and you just have to let it roll off you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your perspectives.
You're welcome.
Let's go on over to Caroline for her question next.
Hi, guys. So we've been hearing a lot about your experiences getting started, and that's kind of part of my question. But it seems like a lot of the ecosystem synthesis that you're both doing requires long-term study. And since we're early career scientists, we haven't probably had the opportunity to develop long-term research program yet. So how would you advise that we would get started with something like that?
Thierry, you want to go first on that one?
Yeah, I can start. Just taking the, well, I guess you have to think about questions that could be interesting you, and then start to find system to answer the questions. Or so just like hearing the example of the paper that Nicholas had chosen to discuss, I think I don't know the team that has been working there, but you could contact these people and try to see whether there would be some complementary work to do on this. I can imagine, self, having read the paper, some complementary work to do, and if you have the skills, or if you propose to acquire the skills to develop these skills, I don't know, you could see with them whether it would be possible to set up something, and who knows, maybe in 15 years you would be leading a long-term program of tracking the response of individuals to changes at broad scale in the California, Mexico system. So I don't know. That's the way I could imagine things, and that's the way I've been doing it myself. Does it answer, or is it a scary answer?
Yeah, I think it's hard because it takes a lot of time, and you don't know where you're going when you first start out.
Yes. So okay. So maybe I should add a few things. Like, of course, if you team up with good groups that have produced really good science and that you can feel that may, yeah, for sure help you to start up in this. But you were also saying at the same time you wanted to know, am I cut down, or I'm not hearing? Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay. Okay. You were pointing at the specific point of how would you start a long-term program yourself, or have your own? That's why. So in that case, if you go like in the Farallon Islands with the team there, it's maybe not the best place to yourself develop an independent thing, because the thing has been going on for a long time, and but at the same time you get training there. You can, on some aspects, start to develop some long-term things. And for instance, I'm working quite a bit on parasites, and so this kind of topic in a place like this or in another place can be developed along the way. So if you join a big team that's already working well on some topics, that's one way to develop on your own, also in interaction with the group or with the group what you want to do. And then it comes back quite often to what kind of question you want to answer. I know at the beginning of the career it's be hard to, but it's vital in science to identify the question first. So, and then where should I be, or to answer these questions, and then in what condition should I put myself to answer the best these questions? That could lead you to contact people, and then to come up with starting to work more specifically on one system. Still a scary answer?
No, it's great.
Yeah, I think Thierry just made a very good point that in the beginning, the hard part is what are your questions, and you have to be able to specify the questions. And so if you specify questions that require long-term data, then that's where you need to get involved with other groups that have some of these long-term data sets. We talked a bit about the Farallons, and that's one of them, but there are dozens around the world, long-term seabird data sets, Not so many necessarily where you have a full community suite of species that have been studied, but still there are at least a half a dozen of those places around the world where you have long-term data. And if your questions, you really want to get at questions pertaining to climate change or sort of these kinds of questions that are long-term in perspective, that require long-term data, then I guess my advice first off would be, get involved with one of these other projects, which is what Thierry suggested as well, and and learn about long-term studies from getting involved with another group. Now, that said, I think there are opportunities that present themselves early in one's career that you don't want to let those opportunities pass. And so I think that you have to be very aware that, maybe this is an opportunity to conduct a long-term study if that's what you want to do in relation to your questions. But one of the postdocs and people that I work closely with, Jared Santoro, started PhD work in the Antarctic, and didn't really intend it to be a long-term study, and now he has almost 20 years of data. So these things happen, and you can take advantage of them when they happen. I guess that's, so try to be nimble enough to be able to be responsive when the opportunity presents itself. Long-term studies are extremely difficult to conduct. I mean, they take a lot of funding, and a lot of the time they're not particularly interesting. You're just developing more data. Of course, with each year it gets more and more interesting. So, but it's a tricky one. It's a very good question as well.
Thank you very much.
Great. I think Shur had a follow-up question there.
Yeah. Do you think long-term data sets should be kept alive just because they're long-term data sets, or do you think there might be an expiry date on some long-term projects when you're not getting that much new insight from them?
Wow, another good question.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm sure Bill would have a really great answer on that. I think in some cases, yes, they should be stopped because we can't study everything and get information on everything everywhere. Because basically, if we never stop, eventually that's maybe where we will end up. Ideally, the studies and the data that are gathered to answer questions, at least at short, mid-term, and some quite often they can lead to long-term, especially in seabirds because of their long-lived encyclopedicity. They can lead to long-term data set that allows answering other questions. But it's a tricky question because of course there is all the data that has been gathered, but then, well, clearly there's limited resources in terms of money, in terms of skills of people, and in terms of number of people that can do things. So yeah, this has to be considered, and in terms of what questions need to be answered, and how many people you want to work on this. Should we, in some cases, should we work mostly on one species in many places, or should we work on a few places on many species? It depends on what kind of, again, the question. And like, for instance, I'm working on kittiwakes. I think it's a good species in some way because we can have long-term study locally to answer questions on a short, mid-term, and long-term, but also we can capture at much broader scale, spatially and temporally, some spatial variability because there are many teams in the world, in Brittany, in Svalbard, in Scotland, and even North Pacific and so on, dealing with the same species. So I don't know. So then, in kittiwakes, I would suggest no, don't stop. But
yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, all things being equal, we would always like to keep these long-term data sets alive, but that's not the way it generally is. Some of the data sets are, I think, more important than others. And I think the importance of of each of these data sets in part has to do with the PI's willingness to share that data and to share it globally, because where we're headed is looking at using big data and integrating data across different disciplines. And so if people are willing to share, then I think that it's very important to keep those particular sites alive in those particular locations. If people aren't so willing to share, I think that that's where maybe there could be sacrifices, because then it becomes sort of a private research enterprise, and that's not what we need. We need extensive data sharing, and I think the movement towards open access of data and journals requiring that the data is posted and shared when papers are published, that's all a great thing, and we all need to embrace it. I'm not sure that graduate programs are putting enough effort yet into training graduate students in sort of the need for data sharing, but I think that that's really, and it comes down to which long-term studies, if you had to make these choices, do you keep and which do you sacrifice. I would certainly look at sort of people that put their data out there for anybody to use as a key attribute that you would want for a long-term study to continue and continue to be funded. Now, the interesting thing is that the more you share, I think the more funding you get. So, but that's a hard lesson for people to accept as well. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, I think
Thank you for those answers. Yeah. Sorry.
Really good point. Well, I'll just add. Well, I think that point is really important. And what is nice is that we see that people are more and more sharing data. And I guess another point is that, as I was saying, it depends on the question. Then from the question comes the design, and depending on the design in terms of like capturing design that can capture processes while taking into account all the sampling issues that you have in the field, that you may have in the field. This is an important aspect that may vary between long-term studies, and so this may also be considered as an important factor when you want to decide which data set basically is especially valuable and should be carried on compared to others.
Yeah, thanks for those answers. Very inspiring, actually.
So I think we have just about 5 minutes left, so probably just time for one more question. Is Jenniferpravasi back? Are you back, Jennifer? Yeah, I see your video. Okay, let's go to your question about skills that early career scientists should be picking up along the way.
Sure. So my question was, sorry, is it my question or Jennifer Lang's question? Or is it, sorry, do you want me to, I can ask the questions about data analysis. So one of the, well, as we see, so many papers come out and there's so many different types of data analysis, it seems that every type of study, every type of study species, has a different data analysis. It seems to be really plentiful. So my question is, as an early career researcher trying to really develop questions and ideas and present those in novel ways, what are the types of skills or statistical analysis would you recommend most that we learn?
Yeah, I can take this one. Actually, this week I am at the Ecological Society of America meeting in Baltimore, and just before I was at the meeting where we were discussing quantitative ecology approaches with quite skilled people in this field. So, so from the talk I've seen, there are clear big changes in terms of tools that will be available and that are already available compared to 10 years ago, 5 years ago. And so, well, I guess you may already be aware of a lot of that, but what I see is, and it's obvious if you have explain what's going on in this field. What I can see as the thing that is changing right now is all these models that can disentangle observation error from the processes and do that at a hierarchy of scales. So there's a lot of Bayesian type of approach that are doing this, and there's so there are quite a few books and workshops coming out on this kind of topic. And the idea with, for instance, the Seabird question that Seabird biologists may ask is that integrating different types of data also in the modeling. So data you can get on demographic rate, vital rates such as survival, breeding success, but also changes in population size, and integrating these two types of data, or data on distribution at sea gathered through observation and those gathered through tracking of individuals. These are pretty tricky questions, but the tools are becoming available, and so I guess in the next 10 years there will be a lot of things done in these fields. So I would, or at least some of you, I would suggest if you're ready to tackle this kind of topics, not to hesitate at all to start to read and implement this kind of method. I don't know if I was precise enough about the method, but it's all this hierarchical modeling. So there are books by Andy Royal that are coming out on this kind of topic, and I think this is so I know, well, I'm much less familiar with the oceanographic type of spatial analysis and so on, but I guess in these fields also, this kind of model must be also useful.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think that, again, let's go back to the need to specify one's questions. And a lot of the questions that we've talked about today have had to do with climate change, long-term sorts of questions. And in those cases, I think that the skill, that you really need from a data and analysis standpoint have to do with time series analysis, and we don't generally, people don't take a lot of coursework in time series analysis. It's very complex, very difficult. So, for example, if you are interested in climate change and effects on marine ecosystems and effects on seabirds, I would say if that's the angle to your research, then the more that you can learn about time series analysis, spectral analysis, wavelet analysis, and I know we're getting kind of into the weeds here a little bit, cross wavelets, there's a number of different ways of going at, decomposing the variance of changes through time that are really time series techniques. And so if that's what you're working with, you're interested in those sorts of questions. Thierry mentioned spatial analysis and hierarchical models in spatial analysis as well. If that's the emphasis, is looking at predators and prey at sea, seabirds and prey at sea, then focusing on the spatial techniques, and I'm not an expert in this, but that are being developed, many of them very complex, highly numerical. Those are very important to work on as well. So again, it really boils down to the hardest thing in science, which is specifying your questions, and then working from that standpoint to develop the expertise that you need in order to answer those questions.
Yeah, I totally agree. But actually, some of these approaches are quite good to force you to actually specify well the question. So, for instance,
yes,
some of the hierarchical models or the ways to account for, in case of a lot of the demographic work, uncertainty or whether you detect the individual survived or not, like capture, mark, recapture type of approach. You have to disentangle the biological process from the sampling process, and this forces you to actually specify what is the underlying process that I want to deal with, and what parameters do I want to actually estimate, and then how do I do it, and then there are the tools, statistical tools. But these first steps are really important, and so it's good to acquire the statistical skills. But again, the question.
Very difficult.
But fun.
But fun, yeah, difficult.
Thanks for both of you answering.
Well, we are pretty much out of time, but this was a really wonderful discussion, and I want to thank all of our early career scientists for the work that you put in to prepare the questions. I think we had some really interesting ones this time around, and many thanks to our featured masters, Dr. Boulinier and Dr. Sydeman. Thank you so much for taking the time this morning. We really appreciate all of the wisdom you have imparted on us. And thanks also to our online audience who tuned in, and we hope this will be a good resource for people moving forward. It'll be on our YouTube channel, the Meet the Masters WSC2. I also want to announce that we've got 2 more Meet the Masters sessions before the World Seabird Conference in October. The next one is on September 17th with Dr. Leandro Bugoni, who's a Brazilian seabird researcher, and Dr. Ross Wanless, who is a South African researcher, and they're going to be talking about perspectives from the South Atlantic on seabird research. And then we have another one on October 5th with Peter Hodem and David Towns, and they're going to be talking about island conservation within a community perspective, so working with communities to do island conservation. So both of those promise to be pretty interesting. And there are still slots available for early career researchers to take part in the live discussion. So if people are interested or know people who are interested, please let them know that we're still recruiting early career scientists for that. Let's see. Shura, do you have any other announcements that we should make before we sign off?
Not really. Except that... sorry, I'm seabirds.net is a great website to go. That's where we tend to post most of the things. So just stay updated there. That's all I have to say.
Great. Well, thanks everyone, and we will go ahead and sign off.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and everybody for all this.
Yeah, thank you very much, Amanda and Shura, for organizing, and the students for participating. It's been excellent.
Yes.
Great.
Looking forward to seeing all of you at the Seabird Conference.
Indeed. Yes. See you all in Cape Town.
Looking forward to it.